Okay, we're live. Thank you everybody for joining. Tonight's learning is the Refuah Shleimah, Henya Rivka bas Brachah Dvora, and in the merit of Miriam bas Elisheва and Sarah Liaora bas Elisheва, and they should have everything that they need, only good things. All right. So this week's Torah portion is Parshas Vayechi. So before we get into what we're going to study tonight, we're going to have to get to some background and a little review of last week's Torah portion and the previous weeks. So last week's Torah portion, right? Jacob comes to Egypt, and with his whole family. And in this week's Parsha, it begins Vayechi Yaakov, that Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, from the age of 130 to 147. He lived in Egypt, and it says that he lived shows that these are actually the best years of his life in exile in the land of Egypt. His suffering is over. Joseph, he's reunited with Joseph. He is has a yeshiva. His children are studying Torah, right? So it's a tremendous time for Jacob. And then after that, Jacob blesses his children, and he passes away. And that's how the Torah portion kind of ends off, with Jacob passing away. Eventually, Joseph passes away. All the brothers, his brothers pass away, and the Jewish people, the exile begins in next week's Torah portion, in the book of Shemos, the book of Exodus. So, in this week's Parsha, Joseph is called by he's told that his father is ill, so he takes his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to get blessed by Jacob. So the Torah records the conversation between Jacob and Joseph. So it says, Vayar Yisrael's b'nei Yosef vayar me'ela. Jacob sees Joseph's two children, and he says, "Who are they?" And Yosef says, "Banai heim asher nasan li elokim bazeh." And he says, "These are my children." And Jacob says, "Bring them here, and I will bless them." Okay, so just an interesting conversation. Like, who are these people, right? What do you mean, who are they? So Rashi says, Jacob wanted to bless them, right? He calls for them. He calls for Joseph. And when they arrived, it says that, Rashi says that the divine presence withdrew from him. So he says, why did the divine presence withdraw from him? Because he saw that Yeravam, who was the king in Israel, who led the Jewish people into idol worship, the Achav, and also Achav, who was also an evil person, would come out of Ephraim. The Yehu Uvanav Menashe, and Yehu, again an evil person, would come out of Menashe. So because of that, Jacob says the Shekhinah, the divine presence, goes away from Jacob. So he says, "Who are these people? That the divine presence is leaving me." So then, what does Rashi say? So what is the answer? So it says that Joseph says, "These are my children who God has given to me with this." So Rashi says, what does it mean? Excuse me. He says, what do you mean with this? What is with this? He shows him, with this is his marriage contract. So he shows Jacob his marriage contract to show that these were not illegitimate children. He had a legal marriage with them, and therefore there's nothing wrong with them. So in other words, Jacob says, "Who are these people? Who did these people come from that the Shekhinah goes away?" So then Joseph answers, "No. My marriage is intact. There's nothing wrong with my marriage." And later, Joseph then prays that God should have mercy on them, and the Spirit of God comes back, and he gives them the blessings. Okay, so just this interesting conversation that Rashi says that happened. So one of the questions about Rashi's explanation there's a few questions about Rashi's explanation. First of all, why is this idea that he says, "Who are they?" Right? Why does Rashi automatically say that he's asking, where do these children come from? Right? Because we would say, what do you mean? He could be, who are they? Could have been, who are these children, right? Who are these people you're bringing with him? And then Rashi explains further that that he said that God gave me these children with this. With this refers to his marriage, his legal documents, right? Which Rashi is supposed to explain the simple explanation of the verse. And this is a very not in the verse. None of this is mentioned in the verse. So Rashi is obviously must be compelled for some reason to say these explanations, even though they're not clear in the verse. So it's very simple. Very simple answer is that yes, Jacob might not have recognized them because it says, right, Jacob was becoming blind at that age or couldn't see well, but he had called Joseph, right? Just like his father had done and blessed his children, and his father and Abraham had blessed Isaac, and Isaac blessed Jacob, right? So obviously he knew he was coming for a blessing, and he knows that if these two people are coming, they're probably his children, right? And we know that he knew them. Not only that, Ephraim would study Talmud with Jacob. He would study with him. And so obviously Jacob knew who they were. So Rashi is compelled to say that who are these people means where did they come from? So then Rashi says, right, why did the divine presence leave Jacob? Because of the people that would descend from Ephraim and Manasseh, right? These evil people. So now God did not tell Jacob why they left, right? Why God didn't give him a reason. He didn't want to pain Jacob by telling him that the reason why the divine presence left is because of the evil, wicked people would come from them. So he says it must be. So Jacob says it must be. It's because of where these children came from. So Joseph eventually, right? He shows him his proof of marriage, right? That his children were born in a sanctified manner, in a legitimate manner, and Joseph prays, and the Shekhinah comes back. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So the question is, what do you mean that Joseph? So now that we got the basic conversation down, right? You have to say that this is the case because of the Jacob knew Ephraim and Manasseh. So it must be that the reason that he's asking these questions is because that was his gut reaction was there's something, the divine presence left, and he didn't know why. Must be that it's because there's something wrong with these children. So the question is, though, going back to the answer of Joseph, right, it says that he showed him his Arison document, his marriage document, and a ketubah. So how is it possible that he showed him a marriage document when marriage didn't exist? Marriage didn't exist until the giving of the Torah. And Maimonides says this clearly, right? That before the giving of the Torah, there was no marriage, and then Torah came and gave marriage, and we see that that even though our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, kept the entire Torah before it was given, but we see clearly by marriage specifically, they didn't keep it in the same way that it was given after the Torah, right? First of all, Jacob married sisters, right? Amram, Moses' father, married his aunt, which is not allowed after the giving of the Torah. Lavan brought Leah to Yaakov in a tricked way, right? He tricked him into marrying her, and after the giving of the Torah, in current Jewish law, if somebody's tricked into marrying somebody, the marriage is not valid, right? It has to be done with consent of both parties. So the whole idea of marriage documents doesn't exist by the forefathers, right? By Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and certainly not Joseph. So what does it mean that he showed him his marriage documents? So there's two marriage documents that are referenced. Obviously, cannot mean literally that they are a contract of Arison, a marriage contract, and a ketubah, which is a marriage document. So let's talk about what these things are. So there's two parts of marriage in the Torah. Number one, there's what's called betrothal, right? Betrothal means that this person is set aside for this person, but they're not actually married. They're not living together as husband and wife. This is, in modern times, this is signified by giving the ring, right? When the husband gives the wife the ring, I should say the husband, he's not the husband and wife yet, when it's the groom gives the bride the ring, she becomes, it's called kiddushin, which means she is now separated from the whole world, and only they are together one unit. But that's not what actually makes them married. What makes them married is bringing her into his domain, which is the chuppah, right? The chuppah is the groom goes, right? And that becomes his domain, and the bride comes afterwards into his domain, and that becomes the marriage. Then there's the ketubah. The ketubah is a contract, which actually is not a binding contract as far as the actual marriage, but it's binding, in fact, in the fact that it's legal responsibilities from the husband to the wife, right? And usually part of the chuppah ceremony, the husband will give the wife the ketubah, but it's not the actual marriage. It's the responsibilities of the husband to the wife, which is to clothe her, to feed her, to live with her, if in case of divorce or death, what his financial responsibility is, etc. So when Rashi says that he showed her his Erisin document and his ketubah, it must be that those ideas. Because before the giving of the Torah, right, a man would meet a woman in the marketplace and just say, look, you want to be my wife? No problem. After the giving of the Torah, we said, no, there has to be a period of getting to know the person, and I can't just marry somebody off the street. So we do that through kiddushin, through giving the monetary value of the ring. We're saying that this person is, I'm now, this person specifically, it's not just I took somebody off the street, right? And in fact, the Talmud says that you can't actually, even if you can't even do that. You can't even give a ring to somebody off the street, right? You have to first meet them, and it's you're not allowed to marry somebody before you meet them. So by showing Jacob his quote unquote his marriage document, he was showing Jacob that this was somebody that he knew, right? That his marriage was intact, that this was somebody that he had a relationship with, right? He had met her, and they wrote a document and proving that he had not just married somebody off the street. Number one. And number two, he showed that during his actual marriage, so his marriage, the actual marriage was correct, right, through the marriage document. Then he shows him the ketubah document, which again, not an actual ketubah, but the idea that he had obligations to his wife, right, that he had his responsibilities to his wife were laid out, right, that so the actual period of his marriage was also conducted in a correct manner, right, that he had responsibilities to her and he took it seriously, right. So we see here that Joseph was essentially saying to Jacob that this was not something that he took lightly, right? That his marriage was totally in holiness. So what's the bottom line? What is this, everything in the Torah is forever. Everything in the Torah is relevant forever. So what does this have to do with us, right? It's a weird conversation between Joseph and Jacob. What does it have to do with us? The bottom line is that we see when it comes to a lot of times people say that, why did this happen to, it's not fair that this happened to somebody, right? It's not fair. But the truth is, while it might not be fair, the reality is that our marriages have an effect on our children, right? The way we get married, the way we act while we're married, right? Just as Joseph showed that he had been married correctly and he acted correctly during his marriage, it has an effect on his children. So he was saying to Jacob, there can't be that my marriage had a bad effect on my children. I had a proper marriage, right? End of the day, we are responsible for what happens to our children, even though it might not be fair, right? It might not be fair that something I did affects my children, but that's the reality. That's the reality. That's the responsibility that we have to our spouses and to ourselves, right? And to our children, even more so, right? We have this responsibility that we have. Their futures are in our hands, and based on the Jewish education that we give our children, that's going to be their Jewish experience. Based on the way you treat your spouse, that's the way they're going to treat their spouse. So that's the reality they were going to think. That's the way you treat a spouse. Or the way that you treat other people in your home, that's the way that your children will think. That's how you treat people in a home. So it's very important that we understand that nothing happens in a vacuum, and our children don't grow up in a vacuum. And what this is really showing us, this idea in this Rashi, that this conversation between Jacob and Joseph about the status of his children is really about the effect of our actions on our children. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. And everything we do has an effect. And obviously, this is specific to children, but the truth is that really it applies on a broader sense to our general surroundings, right? That what we do has an effect on others, right? What we do has an effect on the people around us, has an effect on our families, has an effect on our community, has an effect on the Jewish people, and effect on the whole world, right? Like Maimonides says, one mitzvah can tip the whole scale of the whole world into good, or God forbid the other way. So everything we do matters and has an effect on others. So we can't say, oh, well, I'm just doing me, I'm just going to focus on me, and it doesn't really matter, other people have to focus on them. It's not true. Every single one of us has to focus and realize that we have to do the right thing, what God wants from us, and that is going to have an effect on our whole surroundings, our whole community, and especially on our families and on our children. Have a good Shabbos, and have a great week. We'll see you next week.